Hello, in the air, the program time. Today, the main theme is the celebration of the 50th anniversary of victory. Official celebrations have begun, and observing the chronology of the day will begin with wreath laying at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Moscow. Moscow, the Alexandrovsky Gardens, the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. One of the many unknown soldiers of that war, one of the 27 million who were known to have never returned home. Today, to honor them and the debt of memory, came the President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, the First Vice Premier, Alexis Kavets, and military commanders. Later, wreaths were laid by the delegations of the Duma and the Federative Council. The remains of the unknown soldier were transferred here from the Leningrad Street, 41 kilometers to Moscow. It was the same case where there was nowhere to retreat to. The unknown one remained there forever. Others moved ahead to Berlin, losing comrades in Leningrad, Kiev, Minsk, Stalingrad, Odessa, Sevastopol, Brest, Tula, Kerch, and Novorossiysk. The literally blood-drenched soil from heroic cities has also been gathered here in Alexandrovsky Garden. Marching triumphantly, our forces of the Honorary Guard. Time doesn't tarry, but flies ahead. The 9th of May is tomorrow. Until today, there is still much to do. 2 hours later, on Manege Square, 2 steps from the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, the unveiling of the monument to the most famous commander of the Great Patriotic, Marshal Zhukov. The monument to the Marshal was unveiled by the President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin. The monument was installed near the Historical Museum a few days ago, but the official unveiling was scheduled for today, probably not by coincidence. On the 8th of May 1945, exactly 50 years ago, the 4-time hero of the Soviet Union, Marshal Zhukov, on behalf of the government of the USSR, received the capitulation of fascist Germany. The triumphant assembly was opened by the mayor of Moscow, Yuri Lushkov. Participating in the ceremony were the heads of the chambers of the Russian parliament, Ivan Rybkin and Vladimir Shemeka, the First Vice Premier, Alexis Kavets, the Minister of Defense, and military commanders and veterans. For all of us, this day is extremely pleasant and emotional when the monument to Zhukov was unveiled. This is a noble act, and I think that this event will remain forever in the lives of our people, and we will always retain the fond memory of Georgy Konstantinovich Zhukov. At the unveiling ceremony, also present was the Patriarch of Moscow and all Russia, Alexei II. In an interview to our program, he said, "I think that today's event will enter history. Historical justice is being restored for those who, in many ways, predetermined our victory, and the unveiling of the monument in Moscow and other cities to Georgy Konstantinovich Zhukov. This is the restoration of historic justice and the homage of respect to the tribute of respect to the man who played such a great role in achieving great and glorious victory of the 50th anniversary, which we celebrate." Top official figures of the government left, and so did security detail. Each person may now approach the monument to the Marshal and pedestal. And everyone does. Some place flowers at the pedestal of the former commander, and some remember their own who never returned 50 years ago. This is such a day today, a celebration and eyes full of tears. The signing of the pact on the capitulation of Germany for Europe began on the 7th of May 1945. During the night from the 8th to the 9th of May, the new countdown in history began. During the night from the 8th to the 9th of May 1945, in Berlin, the act of the unconditional capitulation of Germany was signed. The historical ceremony occurred in the hall of the former cafeteria of the German Military Engineering Academy. Exactly at midnight, the Marshal of the Soviet Union, Georgy Konstantinovich Zhukov, entered, and following him were representatives of the command of the Allied forces. They were the ones who were instructed to sign the document which would turn one of the blackest pages in the history of human civilization. The German generals awaited in the neighboring room. The day before, on the 7th of May, they had already capitulated before the Allied forces, hoping thereby to avoid the unpleasant meeting with their main adversary. However, their plan did not go through. Learning of the sign of capitulation in the Reims, Stalin demanded a repeat of that procedure. No one objected. Then, in Europe and America alike, everyone still well remembered thanks to whom, for the most part, was it possible to defeat Hitler Germany, and who, long before the opening of the Second Front, had annihilated in bloody clashes 70% of its monstrous military power. The Germans knew this best of all. Only 5 years ago, the General Field Marshal Keitel received the capitulation of the humiliated and crushed France. It's interesting, did he remember at those moments how triumphantly his forces marched along the roads of terrified Europe until they entered the limits of the Soviet Union? On that day, it seemed that no one would ever forget the labor of our soldier who saved the world from Hitler genocide. But 50 years later, there would be people who would say that there was no victory at all, that the capitulation in Karlshorst was not authentic, and that the real one was in the Reims. And on the eve of the anniversary of victory, there would be such unscrupulous individuals who would defile the tombs of Soviet soldiers in Europe. Unfortunately, human memory is too short, and today, half a century later, after the end of the Second World War, which took the lives of 50 million people, on the earth again cannons roar and people die. Now, we have an opportunity to still stop and remember what that war caused mankind and with what price its terrifying machine was stopped, and finally, to whom we all owe our lives. To whom we all owe our lives. The faces of these people one could see at the triumphant assembly in the Kremlin, although they were few, those who managed to live to today. All Russia will remember them. All Russia remembers them. Those who are alive and those dead, the soldiers of the great patriotic war, the daughters and sons of a great country which broke the backbone of fascism, and with honor enduring hardship and tribulations of that war, and raising the banner of victory, dusty and battle-worn, exalted by the feats of people, over the overthrown Reichstag in May of 1945. Today in this auditorium of soldiers and victors, I bow before you in full prostration on behalf of those living and future generations of Russians. Glory be to you. Let's remember today those who gave their lives for the sake of victory. Let's remember those who fell on the fronts, your combat friends, dear veterans. They all died so that we could live and so that we could gather after 50 years for the anniversary of victory. Let us remember them. I ask that we honor the memory of those who perished with a moment of silence. At the tribune of the veterans of war, the hero of the Soviet Union, Marshal Kulikov, I would like to join in what you have said. We shouldn't live today only by festive occasions, and not by festive reminders of the merits of the valorous warriors of the Red Army. This should be an object of constant concern for the soldiers who saved not just Russia, but all mankind. We veterans wanted to assure you that while we have strength and health, we will do everything so that our country, and incidentally all countries, would be together and would flourish. On behalf of the younger troops, the veterans are addressed by the great-grandson of the frontier of the Soviet Union from the Suvorov Academy, Dmitry Utkin. The emotional words, "I serve my homeland," are the essence of the arm of our service, and I am proud of it. As the great Russian military commander Mikhail Illarionovich Kutuzov said, "There is no higher honor than to wear the Russian full-dress uniform." I have that honor. At the triumphant assembly was addressed by the Patriarch of Moscow and all Russia, Alexei II. Anniversary days are grief and also joy, which has rejoined us above the enmity of this world. They have joined veterans from countries which at one time comprised the Soviet Union. And let this bright moment of joining not be forgotten by us even tomorrow. Let there never and nowhere be grounds for the destructive ascent of fascism and aggressive nationalism. Peace to you, well-being, and God's help in all of your labors for the benefit of our great homeland. It was also triumphant in Petersburg, where the main naval military parade of Russia was held, the parade of ships from 6 countries of the anti-Hitler coalition and the Russian fleet. Senatskaya Square. From here, in the olden days, the military naval parades were launched, which date back in history to Peter the Great. The first celebration was dedicated to the Hangud victory, which was achieved by the Russian fleet in 1714. And today, at the historical Senatskaya Square, veterans of the Great War gathered, leaders of the city and the district, a multitude of guests, among whom were the Vice Premier of Russia, Anatoly Chubais, and others, marching triumphantly past the tribunes were battalions and regiments with banners of past war, and following them students of military academies and schools. Later, the head commander of the naval forces of Russia, Felix Gromov, received the parade, and dignified guests on the Admiral's cutter Albatross made the rounds of the ships on line, and beginning by tradition on the cruiser Aurora. In the lineup were ships representing all the fleets of the Russian Federation, among them the missile cruiser, the Marshal Ustinov, which was built in Leningrad and recognized as one of the best ships of its class. The only envoy of the Black Sea Fleet was the patrol ship Ladny, on which the military naval flag of Soviet Russia was raised. Participating in the parade is the ship at the construction dock of the Baltic Fleet, the nuclear cruiser ship Peter the Great. For the first time in all of Russia's history, at the ceremonies in Petersburg were ships of the countries of the anti-Hitler coalition. In the Baltic winds, national flags of the United States, Great Britain, France, Belgium, and the Netherlands unfurl. Together with British seamen on the frigate Chatham are veterans of the Royal Fleet who participated in the famous northern convoys. There was cause to prove the old military fraternity. The American seamen participating in the main military naval parade of Russian Petersburg saw a tricar which burst into flames on the Lieutenant Smith riverbank. They rushed to extinguish the fire and no passengers were injured. The heads of the 4 allies in the anti-Hitler coalition today also remembered the past in Berlin, but in conjunction, of course, to the occasion today, the Prime Minister of Russia, Viktor Chernomyrdin, flew to Berlin. The 8th of May in Germany is the day of liberation from national fascism and the day of remembrance, repentance, and mourning for victims of the pre- and post-war terror. Therefore, there were no parades or other mass functions in Berlin. In the opinion of Helmut Kohl, such an approach to the 50th date of the capitulation should help Germans be absolved of the yoke of the past and a sense of guilt before the world. Colleagues in Europe, mostly London and Paris, accepted the rules of the game and suggested a theme for the celebration, 50 years of peace on the continent, wishing thereby to emphasize the peaceful role of contemporary Germany, which during this time transformed from an enemy into a partner and friend. Today, the head of the Cabinet of Ministers of Russia, Viktor Chernomyrdin, arrived in Berlin. The itinerary of his visit in the capital of their FRG was limited to 3 hours, during which the Premier laid wreaths to the memorial in Tiergarten and also participated in the triumphant assembly, which is underway currently in the center of Berlin in the grandiose Schauspielhaus. In conjunction with a thoroughly thought-through program, delivering speeches are representatives of the 4 victorious countries and German leadership. Russia. They call the 8th of May the day of the final historical reconciliation, the beginning of the new era of cooperation with all European countries, including Russia. We have no image of an enemy. We have removed that from our vocabulary. And we will do everything and build and develop our relations with our neighbors, with our neighbor countries, only within a spirit of cooperation and understanding. Today, not everything is monosemantic. In Germany, however, neo-fascists desecrated tombstones on the graves of Soviet soldiers who died 50 years ago, liberating the world from fascism. This occurred in the eastern German town of Rudolstadt, and in Berlin, at a cemetery, more than 100 tomb plaques were dislodged from the graves of the victims of Nazi terror. In Potsdam, police dispersed a demonstration of right extremists. In the city Lübeck, unidentified persons set fire to a synagogue. There are no injured. Police seek perpetrators. In Russia, they always knew how to forgive. On the soil of Stalingrad, the current Volgograd, the act of reconciliation took place. For 4.5 months, ceaselessly, night and day, the battle continued over the minute parcel of the Stalingrad land, Mamayev Kurgan. According to official figures, as of the 10th of May 1943, near Kurgan gathered and buried were more than 170,000 soldiers who fell from both sides. And how many of them were left to lie in nameless graves in the steppes at the fringes of the city? For more than half a century, the remains of the fallen were not of concern to many people. Therefore, the idea was born to create on Mamayev Kurgan a memorial military cemetery. Today, its triumphant opening was held, and now each person may come here and seek the burial place of his or her relative, friend, or comrade. At the opening of the memorial cemetery, thousands of veterans of war gathered, the heads of the city and the district, and innumerable guests arrived for the celebration of the 50th anniversary of victory to Volgograd. On the eve in the city, a massive religious action occurred. A triumphant interconfessional divine service in which participating were representatives of Christian communities of Germany. The main event of the joint prayer service was the adoption of a Reconciliation Act blessed by ancient tradition with bread, salt, and wine. From the political statements of the day, journalists' attention is drawn to the words of the President of Ukraine, Leonid Kuchma: "Damned by all generations will be the individual who attempts to sow strife between the peoples of Ukraine and Russia." This was said at official festivities in Kiev. More than 9 million Ukrainians gave their lives for the sake of victory. For 3 years, the war hit Ukrainian land, the eastern front of the homeland. Of the 3 million soldiers who returned from the front, each second one was an invalid. For the anniversary of victory, in Ukraine, delegations of the all once fraternal peoples of the Soviet Socialist Republics convened. Hundreds of thousands of people, residents of 3 neighboring districts, Donetsk, Rostov, and Lugansk, since morning began to gather to the hill Saur Mogila, or tomb, in the steppe near the river Meuse. Here, restored and expanded, is the memorial complex in honor of the troops who stormed one of the most inaccessible fascist defense lines in the war years. It was here that the fascists intended to stop the aggression of the Soviet forces after the battle at Stalingrad and not permit the liberation of Ukraine. In August of 1943, the breakthrough was launched by the forces of the Southern Front. The brilliant, lightning-like assault operation of the forces of Marshal Tolbuchin saved Donbass from full destruction and brought its liberation. The veterans of that battle and youth groups all these years conducted a search in order to establish the names of the soldiers who fell here to free Donbass. For the first time on this land, a prayer service is being held for those troops who fell for the homeland. And in an endless stream, people ascend this 277-meter step in order to lay flowers from the May gardens and fields to the eternal flame in honor of the heroes of the Great Patriotic War. Today in Lvov, a civil requiem was held for those who died in the past war and camps of the Gulag. These May days here are far from celebrative for many here. So fate had foreordained that Western Ukrainians were in various dugouts in that war, some in the ranks of the Soviet army and some in the Galician division or the Ukrainian Rebellion Army. Today, half a century later, living in Lvov side by side are veterans from various armies, people who at one time viewed each other through weapons targets. The dead were reconciled by the earth. For the living, with their memory of the past, it's more difficult. In honor of the 50th anniversary of victory in Tashkent, the first military parade in the history of the armed forces of Uzbekistan. For the first time since Uzbekistan acquired national independence on the main square of Tashkent, Mistakalik, a military parade was held. More than 5,000 soldiers and officers proceeded in a triumphant march, paying tribute to the remembrance of those who fought in the past war. Dedicating this inspection to the 50th anniversary of victory, the armed forces of Uzbekistan demonstrated their high level of service training and the power of their combat equipment. Half a century separated us from victory, and that word for the veterans contained everything which they had fought and lived by, for which they labored in the rear and in the front, where they gave their lives. Years pass, and much is now in the past, but memory is incorruptible, and we bow our heads before the sacred feet of our fathers and grandfathers who made their contribution to the great victory to save mankind from fascism, said the President, Islam Karimov, congratulating veterans of the war at the forum in Tashkent today. In Bishkek, the center of celebrations was Victory Square. Veterans, representatives of the Assembly of the Peoples of Kyrgyzstan, Kyrgyzian troops and Russian border troops laid flowers to the eternal fire. Almost each third resident of Kyrgyzstan participated in the battle with the fascists. Each second one died at the front, near Moscow, Kursk, Ukraine, Belarus, in the Baltic states, and at approaches to Berlin. It seems there wasn't a single home which was passed by a funeral, and not a home where children, women, and the elderly were not taken in, who were evacuated from the fire zone. In the quiet, distant from the front parts, 25 hospitals were set up, treating 40,000 injured. Half the injured were returned to their formations, but half of them could not be saved. Thousands of Red Army troops rest at the Kozalskir cemetery, and the management of the graves was undertaken by the Russian embassy and the city mayor's office. And today, they, together with representatives of the Kazakhstan and American embassies and Belarus representation, laid flowers to the fraternal tomb of the soldiers whom war crossed out of life at only 20 years of age. In times difficult for the Republic, the people of Tajikistan celebrate the victory anniversary. Civil war has left mounds of problems, but can this lessen the significance of the feat which was accomplished 50 years ago by the multinational army, whose main weapon was unity and love for its native land? Today in Dushanbe, to commemorate Victory Day, a military parade was held of subdivisions and units of the National Tajik Army and collective peacekeeping CIS forces. The troops demonstrated combat technology, which successfully is used for defense of the Tajik stretch of the state border of the Commonwealth. Even today, when we're celebrating the great victory, one still must mention what is happening in Chechnya. Today there, a message was distributed, signed by the acting commander of the federal forces, the Colonel General Yegorov, in connection with the heightened activity of gunmen who continue shooting at the forces. The federal forces will undertake adequate reciprocal measures. During the period of the moratorium, federal forces were subjected to firing 137 times, 19 military servicemen died, 69 injured. The gunmen have heightened activity, and furthermore, the Dudayev regime is undertaking political steps. Itotas channels reported that today a decision has been adopted to hold presidential elections in Chechnya and in 1 year for the Parliament of the Republic. Hence, they are attempting to emphasize that Dudayev is in control of the situation. Nonetheless, tomorrow in Grozny, a triumphant honoring of 3,500 veterans will be held. Today, gifts were presented to them by the Russian Ministry of Emergency Situations, Itotas reports. Today, no matter where people live, they are united by the same feelings. Attempting to strengthen common peace, we confirm the will of our peoples to achieve multilateral cooperation within the framework of the Commonwealth, as well as with all countries in the name of peace and well-being. This excerpt from the address of the heads of the CIS to the people of the CIS is only a portion of an entire package of documents adopted by the Commonwealth on the 50th anniversary. Here also is the creation of Intergovernmental Centre to immortalize the memory of defenders of the homeland, publication of a biographical text of the Knights of the Order of Glory in 3 steps, and to hold a Spartak sports event of the CIS in Petersburg. Finally, several recommendations of an economic nature, such as mutual recognition of benefits and guarantees to war veterans. According to the Executive Secretary of the Commonwealth, Ivan Karacheny, they are speaking of a unified approach to the system of social security for veterans. Such a direction is furthered by the personal observance of the Executive Secretary. In almost all CIS countries, veterans today feel that they are citizens of one country, as soldiers of one battalion on the front line. They had asked me by request that when we have our next meeting of the heads of state, it must be noted that we are few who remain, and we would like to have attention from the current authorities, that we not be deprived of that attention. I feel that these petitions, requests, and appeals of the people will be found and will be the basis of the documents possibly signed by the heads of state at the next meeting. Triumphant functions in the Baltic states as well. However, in Estonia, the Day of the Fallen in World War II is noted, and reconciliation of Estonians participating in the war, both on the side of the USSR and Germany. In Lithuania, at noon exactly today, broadcasting was interrupted by almost all radio stations, with a moment of silence throughout the Republic. Triumphant ceremonies began in memory of the victims of the Second World War. Today in Latvia, they're commemorating the defeat of Nazism and memories of the victims of the Second World War. In the battles to liberate Latvia from the German fascist occupiers, more than 160,000 Soviet soldiers died. In the ranks of the Red Army and the partisan regiments, 150,000 residents of Latvia fought. During the year wars, the fascists on Latvian soil annihilated thousands and thousands of peaceful residents, almost all the Jewish population living in Latvia. During the Second World War, Latvia lost 1/3 of its sons and daughters. At the Fraternal Cemetery, a joint service was held of the basic religious confessions. Speaking to those gathered, the President of Latvia, Guntis Ulmanis, called to honor the memory of all those who gave their lives for the freedom of humanity. The President, Ulmanis, the head of government, Galis, the chairman of the Saim, Gorbunov, laid flowers to the tombs of the Soviet soldiers, and as well at the Jewish cemetery and at the tombs of the German soldiers. In Moscow, by tomorrow, guests should arrive from 52 countries already. Today, planes landed one after another. The 8th and 9th of May in Moscow are also time for serious diplomatic talks at a high level. President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, today met with the UN Secretary General, Boutros Ghali. With the UN head, Boris Yeltsin discussed the matters connected with Russia's participation in peacekeeping actions, which are underway under the UN's aegis in hot points of the planet. President urged that rejection of double standards be pursued. This was announced by head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Department, citing the presidential words in saying that Russia and the CIS, in essence, are solitarily dealing with crises and conflicts such as Georgia and Tajikistan. We're spending people and sending our money. At times, our people are dying. Andrei Kozyrov notes. According to Kozyrov, UN dispatches peacekeepers to Bosnia and Croatia, but seems not to pay particular attention to the republics of the former Soviet Union. Today at the meeting in the Kremlin with the chairman of the Chinese People's Republic, Chen Zemin, Boris Yeltsin said that in relations between our countries there are no serious problems. In the opinion of the president, Russia and China are ready today for a partnership which was prepared for by successfully developing recently trade, economic, science, technological, military, technological cooperation. Judging from the results of the meeting, Boris Yeltsin and Chen Zemin confirmed their interest in developing two-sided ties, the future of which in Moscow and Beijing is assessed quite optimistically. It's presumed that an important phase in formulating Russian-Chinese partnership will be Boris Yeltsin's visit to China, which, as was learned after today's meeting, will take place this year. Today, the President of Russia congratulated Jacques Chirac on being elected President of the French Republic. This was the scenario in the center of Paris last night when the results of the voting were announced. Many thousands of Parisians who supported their mayor filled the main square of the capital, Accord Square. Until late at night, people celebrated. Jacques Chirac's path to the Élysée Palace was long and thorny. The third decisive attempt for him, who since 1986 had been striving for that goal, was successful. Defeating in the second round the Socialist Party candidate Lionel Jospin, he became the fifth president of the Fifth French Republic, founded by General de Gaulle. Jacques Chirac was born in Paris in 1932 in the family of a bank employee and received a marvelous education. In his youth, he was interested in archaeology, studied Russian language, and is well acquainted with Russian literature. In the 1960s, his political career began. 2 times in the middle of the 70s and in the 1980s, he headed the government of France. He had often visited the Soviet Union and Russia. During the current electoral campaign, Jacques Chirac was the only candidate to devote attention in his pre-election platform to relations with Russia. An unforgivable mistake bearing difficult consequences would be, he says, to attempt to isolate Russia and leave it alone with its current difficulties. He's convinced it's indispensable to support the efforts of this great friendly country in restoring democracy and a legal state after decades of totalitarian rule. And it so happened that Jacques Chirac's victory fell on the very eve of the day of victory celebrated today in France. In an interview to the program Time, Jacques Chirac, the new president of France, expressed a desire that the losses sustained in the war by the great Russian people would be a foundation for stability and flourishing of Russia and building of such a Europe which would have close ties of friendship and cooperation with Russia. A convincing victory was held during the second round of administrative elections in Italy by the left-centrist forces. They won in 45 provinces where elections were underway, and now will head the administration in the Roman, Milan, and other provinces of the country. Almost half the population of Western Slavonia, that's 12,000 people, have become refugees. This is one of the results of the assault by the Croat army, which happened in the beginning of May. Representative of the UN command confirmed that Croats launched targeted fire on the peaceful residents who were fleeing the combat area. More than 5,000 people are still surrounded by the Croat army near the city-town Pankarac, and their fate is unknown. Under pressure from the international community, Croatia took on an obligation to refrain from risky military operations in West Slavonia. This territory is controlled by the Krajina Serbs and was under UN force protection, who could not stop the Croat assault. And now on the other side of the planet, we're not shooting as heard, but bells. The bells of St. Basil's, they're quite audible in China. Russian national melodies heard near the St. Basil's Cathedral and by the Kremlin walls are quite audible in the Chinese capital. The marching band of the Far East Military District is performing on this red square for the first time. It's smaller than the real one, but in the rest no worse than the original, just as other tourist attractions from the entire world gathered in the Beijing World Park. The Russians disembarked there among the International Airborne Group of military marching bands. China hosts such a festival for the first time, dedicating it to the 50th victory of the Great World War. The world then survived because of a man with a rifle. Now, the participants of the festivities from Scotland, Canada, and Pakistan and China hope that that world peace will be even more secure if people in uniform are seen only by audiences with approval. And at the final gala concert in the World Park, all melted into a symbolic handshake overseas. This was the title of one of the compositions performed by this international orchestra. Later, the Russians repeated the path of their fathers and grandfathers, and here from Red Square they marched through half of Europe in the exhibit. On the stage of the Bolshoi Theater, the famous Spanish singer Jose Carreras has performed. This is an event of the theatrical season, but for us it's also an event that we managed to get his exclusive interview. Usually he refuses to speak with the press. There is no such fan of opera who wouldn't know Jose Carreras performing with triumph on the best stages of the world: La Scala, the London's Covent Garden, Salzburg, Madrid. Emerging in the era of the incomparable reign of the world-famous tenors Luciano Pavarotti and Placido Domingo, he lived through the hours of stardom, shining in Carmen and Tosca. I'm happy that after so many years I'm again in the famous theater of the world. What regards my life, thank God for now I'm lucky. I have many projects, and one of them today has come to be. But most of all, I'm an opera singer, and I'd like to perform here in an opera production in which everyone likes, possible Carmen, and sing Don Jose. After my illness, I reviewed many things, my relations with my children. My son is 21 years old. He's a student of law. My daughter is 16. She's more beautiful every day, and I'm happy. His fate is dramatic, debuting with the famous Montserrat Caballé, who discovered him. He again, with her, sang in the opera Medea, conquering leukemia, which befell him at the zenith of his glory, when more than 70 of his discs were recorded. His fans were insane and followed him, and this was his second birth. Thousands of people came then to the south of Spain to greet their favorite singer. Rome, 1990, the birth of the famous trio Domingo Carreras, Pavarotti. 4 years later, again together, the three tenors in Los Angeles at the opening of the soccer championships. And again, their performance is a sensation. And in Europe, the CD, which came out as a bestseller. On the stage of the Bolshoi, Jose Carreras sang arias from the operas of Leoncavala, Puccini, and Neapolitan songs, and he received a standing ovation, as it happens in days of true triumphs of high art. My time has come to an end in this program. Tomorrow, celebrations on the occasion of the victory will continue, and our program tomorrow will be longer than 1 hour. Today, however, I wish that on the day of the greatest and brightest celebration of all, that you would be calm and joyous in your heart. Colleagues from Public Russian Television join these congratulations. And so that women tomorrow could be especially beautiful, have a look at what hairstyles are in style. Today in Frankfurt on the Main, the European Hairdressers Competition was held. Participating were the best masters from Great Britain, Spain, Germany, and other countries of the continent. Reuters TV reports that Russia was represented by Olga Burgomistrova. How the inventions of the hairstyles were assessed by the jury, we don't know yet, but the models were pleased with their new looks. And what can be more rewarding to a master than acknowledgement from a person whom he's granted a new hairstyle? I don't know what hairstyles you're going to choose, but the main thing is to be in a good mood. All the best. Good evening on Channel 1, the Sports News. The Russian handball team has begun with victory in the World Championships in Iceland. Today, the Russians beat the Cuban team 21-17. And now let's go back 1 day ago into the atmosphere of the final match of the World Hockey Championships, our brief commentary. The trainer of the Finnish team, Kurt Lindström, showed his true professionalism. He's the only trainer in the world who managed to win a championship 2 times with different teams. In 1987, as the second trainer in the Swedish team, and this time he brought the Finns to victory. The Finnish team, or more precisely its game, was a pleasant revelation and probably a standard for all participants. Sufficient to say that the top trio of the team, Perttunen, Koivun, Helminen, and the defender Jutila, are among the 6 best players of the championships. And so the Europeans have found out who's the strongest, and the North Americans for now are along the way. 12 more teams have entered the battle for the Stanley Cup yesterday. In the East, there were no major sensations, but in the West, we'll note the victory of Detroit and the victory goal of Vyacheslav Kozlov. San Jose was surprising, visiting the Sharks. The visiting Sharks beat the leader of the Pacific Division, Calgary, a goal for Makarov. One may probably say that in Moscow, the ice season finally ended yesterday in the Sports Palace of the Army. A festival of figure skaters of Russia was held for the veterans of the war. This festival was organized by the Moscow Federation of Figure Skating and gathered many participants, as famous and quite young skaters as well. Performances by children, ballet, skaters of Moscow were in a 2-hour program. The members of the Russian team ended the festival: Maria Buturskaya, Irina Slutskaya, and the current European champion, Ilya Kulik. Soccer news. As you probably know, the most ardent rivalry is in the German championships. Yesterday, the Bremen Werder held probably the most important victory of the season at home over Borussia from Dortmund 3-1. The Bremens now head the tournament chart. In Portugal, the champion became known early, winning in the principal match in Lisbon Sporting 1-0. The Porto team is the strongest among them. Vasily Kulkov and Sergei Uran are playing. Players naturally paid dues to their trainer, Bobby Robson. Unfortunately, before the beginning of the game was darkened by tragedy at the Lisbon Stadium. Part of the tribune collapsed, as a result of which 1 person was killed, 25 injured, and 6 of them are in very serious condition. The major tennis tournaments, which ended yesterday, brought some changes into the world rating charts, everything in its order. The final women's tournament ended in Hamburg, where it turned out that the young Swiss star Martina Hingis cannot yet face the leaders 1-6, 0-6. Such was the score of her final match against Conchita Martinez. In Atlanta, the finals were played by two tennis players who have led the table in their personal matches since childhood. One of them is the current #1 seed of the world, but the 4th seed in the ratings, Michael Chang, proved to Andre Agassi that evening out strengths in world tennis continues. Chang won the match, which lasted for about 3 hours. Our good friend Wayne Ferreira in the finals of the Munich tournament beat the #8 seed, Michael Stich, and now among the top 10 is in 6th place. The unlucky one in Munich, Evgeny Kafelnikov, is down to 9th place. And now we will supplement the panorama of the basic sports events of the day past with our video overview. Ending successfully for the Russian players was the European weightlifting championships in Warsaw, with victories are Sergei Sirtsov and Andrei Chernirkin with world records. Chinese athletes celebrated a double victory at the World Table Tennis Championships yesterday. The women became champions, and today the men's team beat the Swedes 3-2. Vyacheslav Yakimov, in excellent style, won the last phase of the bike marathon DuPont Tour with different starts. He's in 2nd place overall, but the American Lance Armstrong has won. And finally, the playoff games in the NBA. Orlando beat Chicago 94-91 and leads in the semifinal series of those teams in the East 1-0. Indiana has also beat the first match with New York, 107-105. Best on the winners' team were Rick Smith, 34 points, and Reggie Miller with 17 run-ons, 31 points. Finally, in the West, Houston, in the last 5th match of the quarterfinals, managed to beat Utah. Last year's NBA championship continues the rivalry. His next contender will be Phoenix. This was the sports news from Channel 1. All the best.
Добрый вечер.
The weather in the North European parts of Russia will be defined by a broad area of heightened atmospheric pressure. It is the reason for the cold air from the Arctic latitudes penetrates into the northern parts of European Russia. Tomorrow, the border of cold will pass along the south of the Baltic Sea through the northwestern region and along the south of the Arkhangelsk area and Ural. Therefore, in the Murmansk and Arkhangelsk districts, in Karelia and Yensk Autonomous District, and the Republic of Komi, it will be partly cloudy with some isolated precipitation at night, 0-5 during the day, +2 to 7 degrees. In the northeast of Komi, it's around 0 degrees. In the south of the Arkhangelsk district and in the Republic of Komi, it's a little warmer, +8 to 13. In the Baltic states, in the northwestern area, at night, precipitation will cease. During the day, from the south of Scandinavia, cyclones and an atmospheric front will come into the area. Cloudiness will increase in the Baltic states, and rains will pass through with possible thunderstorms during the day, +8 to 13. Another cyclone and atmospheric front will bring to the central and Volga-Dansk area, cloudy area with isolated rain, day temperatures +12 to 17. In Belarus, western Ukraine and Moldova, through the passage of an atmospheric front from the west, rain will fall with thunderstorms and temperatures of +13 to 18. In Moldova, up to +21 degrees. In the east of Ukraine, variably cloudy skies without significant precipitation, +14 to 19. The central Chernozem area, the lower Don, lower Volga, and also the Krasnodar and Stavropol areas and the republics of the northern Caucasus are in the zone of another atmospheric front with cloudy skies and rain. During the day, temperatures are +13 to 18. Beyond the Caucasus, some brief thunderstorms. This is the influence of a cyclone with a center over Baku in Georgia, 13 to 18, and Armenia, Azerbaijan, 18 to 23. In St. Petersburg, partly cloudy skies without significant precipitation at night, 0+2 during the day, +7 to 9. In Moscow, mostly cloudy skies with some brief periods of rain. At night, +5 to 7 during the day, 12 to 14 degrees. That is the weather predicted for the 9th of May. On the eve of the holiday, I congratulate all on the celebration of the anniversary victory, wishing you happiness, health, and clear skies and peace.